Well, welcome everybody. It's a treat to be here this afternoon. I'm Tom Friedman. I'm the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times, and it's an honor to be here with President Calderón.
Mr. Friedman.
It's been a while since we've seen each other, but I've been a great admirer of the work you did to help tee up Mexico's prosperity today.
Thank you very much,
if
sir.
I may
Thank
say
you.
so. Mr. President, the question that seems to me to be lurking in the air everywhere when it comes to the question of developing countries and the G77 is, can they afford clean air and enough jobs at the same time?
We believe in the report of the Global Commission of the Economy and Climate, of which I have the honor to chair, that any country could get economic growth and tackle climate change at the same time. Of course, it's a matter of, like any structural transition, it's a matter of transitional costs, in which you can get winners and losers, or you need to mobilize resources to finance the process. But at the end, even in the medium term, you can get both. The good news is for a lot of less developed countries, they can leapfrog and avoid the mistakes we made in the process. For instance, providing electricity for all for sub-Saharan African countries. They can get the benefits of technology, they can get the benefits of innovation, and then the challenge is to provide them with the capabilities to get the right development, to get the low carbon development. That is possible, yes.
You know, one of the things I notice in the lead up to the Paris COP, I was in Copenhagen, I was in Bali, and when I think back as far back as Bali, there was a attitude among some developing countries of pay me or I'll shoot my trees, you know, I mean basically, which was obviously going to be a loser for them and for us. Mm-hmm. But I sense now, and I really took this away from my last trip to Monterrey. Mm-hmm. I was struck at how many Mexican businesses are in the clean energy, clean power business, both at small and large scale. Is that a difference now that you have a constituency within your country really driving this from within the business community?
Well, in the business community, there are quite responsible companies actually already working in this transition. I can mention, for instance, Bimbo, which is not only the largest bakery industry in Mexico, but actually in the world. Huh. You know? They're doing a lot.
Bakers?
Bakers, yes. Maker. Is the largest in the world already, and they are switching all the way towards renewable energy. And the quite interesting thing right now is if you take Copenhagen, as you were mentioning, and now Paris, I can see several differences. One is the attitude, as you were saying, from some developing countries. Copenhagen, China was blamed about the failure. China has changed, definitely. China now is the largest producer of renewable energy. China is highly committed. By first time, with a memo between President Obama and President Xi Jinping this year, China is providing a clear pathway to the new low-carbon economy. Of course, probably it's not enough, but sure, the signals are incredibly different. What could be the reason? The reason for that? Well, I don't know. We can speculate. It's either because the government is really committed with the environment, or it is because the government has an incredible political pressure coming from the people due to the air pollution. You see,
today's
now
story.
the red alarm right now in Beijing by first time ever.
Yeah.
I think things are changing, whatever could be the reason in China. And the second change is private sector attitudes. Now, private sector is pushing a lot, and the presence of all of you is a clear signal of that. Why? Because now, Tom, the economics are completely different from then. 5 years before, it was so difficult to get across the message that the economics could provide some kind of viability for the low-carbon economy. Now it's completely feasible for a lot of companies making, for instance, putting in place saving energy measures implies not only an incredible reduction of carbon emissions, but also big savings, yes, big profits.
And big new industries, I would think.
Completely, yeah. And actually, for instance, if you analyze the set of companies most committed with environmental issues, those companies are outperformed the rest, for instance, the Bloomberg index for almost 10% in the last 4 years.
Interesting.
And you can see everything, these billionaires, Bill Gates and all those guys, this week announced a big commitment in order to break through research and development in energy in order to make the final transition to that. So good news coming from the private sector, that's a very big difference.
I think your point about U.S.-China too is really critical because we and the Chinese were kind of hiding behind each other. You know, it's kind of after you, no after you.
Exactly.
You know, and I also really believe that people do much more by way of emulation than compulsion. And when they see the U.S. and China going down this road, that's a great model to emulate.
Definitely. This is a question of leadership, definitely. And the American leadership is absolutely needed. The Chinese leadership is absolutely needed. The French leadership is absolutely needed and very welcome. And when China and the US as well change their attitude, a lot of things could happen. And again, what are the reasons for the Chinese government? I think it's the pressure coming from air pollution. We are estimating in the Commission that almost 4 million people a year are 4 million people are
Getting sick?
No, yes, there are 4 million premature deaths in the world. Yeah. 2 of them coming from air pollution outside, and 1 million is in China only. And that implies that almost more than 10% of its GDP, if you can measure in economic terms, such kind of premature deaths, which is huge, the problem. Now, China is a big polluter in absolute terms, not in per capita terms. The United States is the second, so those quite important leadership are changing the game. And that's good news for private sector as well, because what private sector needs is clear signals, economic signals about the future. So you can jump into the field to provide renewable energy, to jump into energy efficiency measures, to advise the local governments for more compact cities, to promote plantations, for instance, everywhere. If you have the signals that the world and the leaders are going to go all the way to low-carbon economy.
You know, we actually have some brain-dead Republicans who have come to Paris in order to lobby against their own government. Do you think did I say that? Was that on the record?
I read what Judith wrote. Judith write about it.
Really sorry. I didn't know we were on the air. I assume that that's not stopping anybody, though. I think, you know, that the world is I feel like leaving them in the dust. You know?
Definitely. Of course, we cannot say victory and that's it. I think it's a long way ahead.
Yeah.
Even with a successful deal in Paris, I see Paris, the COP, just like a milestone.
Yes.
Definitely is not the final line. But the point is, even those Republicans, I believe, you know very well, there are a lot of vested interests in the field. There are a lot of interest in order to stop the issue. I remember, for instance, the tobacco industry in the 50s or the 60s, making this millionaire advertising campaign with doctors and nurses saying, well, there is not scientific evidence that tobacco produces cancer, no? And now we are feeling like there is no scientific evidence that the climate change exists. Well, it exists, but it's not exactly due to human behavior. Definitely it's changing. In the American public opinion, if I understand, there was an opinion poll this year. By first time ever, the vast majority of American citizens won't vote for any denying the climate change, for instance. And of course, will support, in a majority way, the people in favor of taking action against climate change. That's an incredible shift in public opinion.
My friend Joe Round likes to say, you know, the best thing about Obamacare is all these deniers are going to live long enough to see how wrong they were. So it's
they're going to be punished.
Given all that you said, Mr. President, you know, then what is a realistic deal between the G77 and the developed world economies out of here? We see big numbers still being tossed around. $100 billion. I think no one expects that there's going to be a single check written, you know, to the G77 for that. But what's a reasonable compromise?
Well, two things. One is about the 100 billion number. I, I would suggest to stop thinking about $1 billion numbers. It became first in Copenhagen and then it was agreed in Mexico in COP16. However, the opportunities are completely different. We're talking about 100 billion of support, the change, yes, but think only in the infrastructure which is required in the next 15 years. Let's see. If we follow the current business as usual high carbon economy, we will need to invest in cities, energy, and land use roughly $90 trillion in infrastructure everywhere. Now, what happens if we switch all the way to a low carbon economy? How much infrastructure we need? Roughly, we estimate like 94. So the difference is 4 out of 90, which is marginal difference. But the good news is even that difference could be completely offset due lower operational costs. For instance, renewable. Renewable, yes, is capital intensive, requires a larger investment initially, but the operational cost trends to zero. So if we are going to invest roughly $90 trillion in infrastructure, let's do right now the right way. So my point is, we don't require to invent where are we going to get 90 trillion. We are going to pay that any way or another from the same sources. The point is we need to make smarter decisions to invest in that. Instead of invest in a coal facility with locking us in by 50 years or 40, invest in a power plant related with renewable energy. That is feasible. Now the economics are playing in our favor. So we need to shrink. If we still are thinking in 100 billion, yes, we can do that, and maybe we can reach the number. But we need to think the 90 trillion, that's the size of the opportunities we have ahead.
Are you concerned about the fall in oil and gas prices beginning to put a little pressure on the renewable industries?
Yes and no. As Mexican, of course, I am. No, but honestly, thinking as a global citizen, I want to be is, Tom, the issue is paradoxically, let's say 25 years ago, 20 years ago, roughly 25% of the electricity came from oil sources. Now, less than 5%.
Right.
So that's one difference. Second, what is the whole picture about oil right now? The new adjective for oil industry is uncertainty. So oil is a risky business. Mexican mix, for instance, today is like $28. It's incredibly risky business. You are going to put a lot of money. In the future. Renewable energy is providing incredible certainty to the future, and costs are reducing dramatically. I was Secretary of Energy like 11 years ago in Mexico. Now, the price of solar panels is 90% cheaper, 90 cheaper, which is incredible. So oil industry is becoming a quite risky business. For Canadian people, for instance, the sands oil is not affordable. It's, of course, it's not viable right now at those prices. Maybe shale gas or shale oil in the US, for instance, more than half of the drillers are completely stopped this year because these prices are unaffordable for them. So the risky business is oil. Thinking in the industry in the future, renewable industry is going to be completely competitive, completely. So there is some concern, but the problem is not the short-term prices. The problem for the industry is the long-term vision about the profitability of how profitable is your business. And in this case, nobody knows what is going to be the price of oil in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And that is the issue. People will need to invest in the energy of the future. One more thing.
Please.
These issues related with climate change are coming. Either because you believe or not, it doesn't matter. There will be a change. And even though Republicans are talking about the regulatory risk.
Right.
So the governments, sooner or later, and it's better to do sooner, are going to put in place a framework related with regulation of carbon. So the matter of stranded assets is quite important because you can be trapped with a lot of assets that you will never be able to exploit in the future. So that's another issue. So now the equation, even with those old prices, is again in favor of the future, if I can say that.
No, I think so. And I think if you just look at what's coming in terms of population and the rising middle classes around the world in a country like Mexico, it's obvious that clean air, clean energy, clean water, clean power has to be the next great global industry. Otherwise, we're going to be a bad biological experiment, okay? And so the question, I think, for everybody now is, do you want to be part of the next great global industry or not?
Exactly.
Whether you're a Mexican industry or an American one, you know.
Well, you wrote something interesting. Well, talking about how to vote in the American elections. I don't want to be specific, but it's not exactly quote for that. But you say, if you are not in favor of these kind of policies, for like the way you are going to vote, no? You need to prepare a good explanation for your children. You say that, and it's true. Children, the new generations, are completely committed with this. And it's completely weird to them to try to understand why the adults are not taking care of this. What happened with their stupid parents about it? No?
Well, the Republican position on energy is the Welfare for Putin and Ayatollahs Act, you know, and they call that patriotism in my country.
Right.
Okay, so it's...
I don't want to make any politically incorrect opinion about the Republicans.
Getting
but I
carried
agree with
away
you.
here. Let's open up for some questions.
Hi, I have two questions that have to do with the renewable industry. The first is, do you see the renewable industry playing a big lobbying role to turn the, quote, brain-dead, unquote, Republicans around in the US and pressure governments around the world? And the second is a renewable energy cartel likely to emerge, so to become the next OPEC?
Oh,
That's an interesting question.
I don't see that. Well, good question. But first, the lobby in the U.S. is more related with the incumbents and the current interests. No, so the power of the lobby of fossil fuels is incredible. Look at the lobby of coal industry, for instance. But if you see the facts, is there are much more jobs right now and more job creation in renewable energy, in wind energy in the U.S. than the whole coal industry there. But very few people realize that. Second, 2 years in a row, the new investment in power generation in the globe has been more than 50% in renewables. So the change is happening already. I don't see a powerful lobby related with renewable. Actually, a lot of global energy companies are switching toward renewables. That's another thing of this hesitation we have in governments, no? Companies want to change all the way to renewable, some of them, but say, well, what happened if nothing happened in Paris? What happened if the governments are not taking enough action? So they need to cover and hedge their investment in great economy. But this hesitation, this hedge procedure is increasing the cost of the transition, it's increasing interest rates, and a lot of companies are taking a strategy of wait and see. So the only way in which we can make them to jump from the fence and take the advantages of the first movers is to providing clear signals to the market. And that is exactly what we are waiting here in Paris.
Questions from the floor? Back there.
Hello, Pat Leach with Decision Strategies Incorporated. We had a little conversation, a few of us at lunch, talking about where the resistance comes from, because the evidence is simply becoming overwhelming. And I'm increasingly convinced that it really is, it's an emotional reaction. It's the cognitive dissonance that you run into when you're talking to anybody who has worked in the fossil fuels industry. And I used to work in the fossil fuels industry. And a lot of my compatriots, it's not, you can pile all the evidence up in the world, and the problem is that you're dealing with people who are good, honest, hardworking people, same as coal miners, and yet if this is true, this means that they've spent their working life doing something that is potentially contributing to an environmental catastrophe. Therefore, this cannot be true. And there are lots of examples in history of this happening. So how do we deal with that? I think Bob Inglis, a very conservative Republican who actually also believes in science and was a representative from South Carolina, for which the good people of South Carolina voted him out of office. He has been quoted since then as saying that a lot of Americans who lead high energy consumption lifestyles hear global warming and interpret it as an indictment of their lifestyle. So how do we deal with that?
Definitely, we need to design a fair transition. We don't want to send anyone to the street and take out his or her job just for that. I think we need to design a fair transition for all those sectors, and this transitional period could be losers in that sense. But definitely, a lot of things are not happening for several reasons. One, honestly, a lot of people don't know the advantages and the new economics of the transition to the new climate economy. Again, 10 years ago, I shared the perception that it was too expensive to go all the way to renewable energy. It was like naive to think that the change was possible. Today, what is naive is to think that it is not possible. It's completely affordable and viable. And when it, in some countries, for instance, Chile and a lot of them, it's even more competitive to generate electricity with renewable energy. In the US, in Texas, in Austin, a provider of solar energy won a contract with an utility because he was much more competitive. So one is, a lot of people ignore, in very good faith, that changes are happening. A lot of those people are leaders of countries, like I was some years ago, and they really don't know that that is possible. In their mind, it's still an incredible expensive thing. To switch to be responsible with the environment implies huge economic costs. Actually, this is the main obstacle to change, in my opinion. That's the reason why we need to provide economic evidence that it is possible. Finally, there are a lot of interests, economic interests that, as in the tobacco industry, it is clear that they will oppose. But the point is, if we are able to design a fair transition, and at the same time we are able to mobilize the general perception that at aggregate level is much better for anyone, not only for the environment, but also in economic terms, I think we can get the message across.
I think it's a very important point. Please, right here.
Thank you, Oliver Van Heel with Freshfields Broekhuis-Denger. You talk about the transition, and one of the key aspects of the transition is also the energy supply. Because clearly, if we were to make the transition today to renewables, there'll be a massive supply gap, not just in terms of pure supply, but also in terms of baseload. So people say, well, baseload capacity. So people say, well, what you need is you need to carry on with the traditional fossil fuels in order to enable that transition. Do you believe that's the case? Do you believe there are other ways of doing that? Nuclear has been named. How do you think we get that we meet that supply gap?
Well, instead of trying to decree a formal transition by the authority decision, we need to provide the right economic incentives. And for me, that is the key issue. So instead to establish a determined goal of renewable energy of country, which is valid and necessary, more than that, we need, for instance, to remove all the fossil fuel subsidies. Even today, we are paying almost $500 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies, which means we are paying for pollute. First signal, we need to remove fossil fuel subsidies. A lot of people think we need incentives, economic incentives for renewable. Maybe not. Just removing fossil fuel subsidies will be an incredible powerful signal. Second, I think pricing carbon is crucial, and a way in which a bold signal that it will mobilize by itself a lot of decisions. And even for a lot of investors thinking in the future, if you are seeing this change coming, not only in science, but also in the regulatory framework, you won't invest in a coal facility, in a new one. You will invest in a new, which is according with the new regulatory framework. So the economic incentives and the public policy signals are crucial beyond the idea of establishing by decree a change, which it must come from the economic decisions of millions of individuals around the world, around the globe.
One more, real quick. Young lady here.
Thank I used to, Marin Smith with Clean Energy Canada, where we have that risky business of the oil sands. I used to think
Is
the
that
oil
risky or not?
that the oil companies really had to be part of the solution. We had to transform them and get them on board. I'm not so sure anymore, and I'm wondering whether you think they are part of the solution, or whether there's others, new players who are coming in, and in fact, they might be irrelevant. And I'm also wondering, what is the signal that needs to come out of COP? So you've said generally we need the market signal. What does that translate into? What comes out of Le Bourget on Friday that is going to send the signal that you're wanting?
Well, I think a lot of energy companies are thinking in a really smart way, and a very responsible one, and trying to design a fair transition, the long-term one. A couple of examples. Statoil from Norway. Actually, Norway is thinking to go completely to decarbonize its own economy, including oil company, by the middle of this century, which is a very brave decision. And they are thinking seriously on that. Some other energy companies, Shell among others, are providing quite serious research and development in order to explore or analyze how should be the energy transition in the medium term. And that is, I think that's much better than try to block what I think is coming. And I think it would be the case of a lot of companies around the globe. Talking about the regulatory framework, for instance, the decision of the pipeline made by the American government recently, it's a good example about, despite the fact of global warming, the regulatory measures are having an incredible impact already in the decision of the current businesses. Now, what are the agreements we expect for this Friday or Saturday or even Sunday? One, a clear goal for decarbonization of the economy in the second half of this century, completely. Second, a follow-up mechanism in order to review and strengthen the measures or the INDCs every 5 years. And third, a fair mechanism to finance the transition in the short term for developing countries and less developed economies. If we have these three signals upon the INDCs that are already presented by several countries, I think that could be a very powerful one. I need to say that we are not sure of that. If you ask me about what could be the outcome of the Paris COP21, according with the side events like this, it looks like a great atmosphere, isn't it? If we were part of the negotiation, we could just sign and go to celebrate to Champs-Élysées or something like that.
Yeah,
nobody knows what's happening inside. No?
We have to conclude, Mr. President, but what I hear you saying is that I'm a big believer that to name something is to own it.
Right.
You can name the issue, you can own the issue. And in my country, for many years, the people who actually named green were the people who hated it. And they named it liberal, uncapitalistic, sissy, girly man, vaguely European, okay?
Wow.
And
Not even French.
Worse, that's right, vaguely European. And I think what's going on now is people are renaming green geoeconomic, geostrategic, capitalistic, patriotic. In my country, green is the new red, white, and blue.
Could be.
Okay?
We need to rename that with jobs.
Absolutely.
And economic growth.
Absolutely.
If we are able to do that, we will win.
Then you got
We will
everybody.
win.
Thank you very much,
Thank you
Mr.
very
President.
much.
Bring my colleague
you.
Diana up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anytime.